Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of air safety and your own personal safety, we ask that you keep a close watch on your carry-on and personal items.
Welcome to the AeroExploration Podcast, where aviation's past, present, and future meet. We explore the stories that build aviation history, take you inside the industry today, and uncover the career paths and innovations keeping the industry in motion. We go behind the scenes, into the cockpit, and onto the ramp, meeting the people and discovering the places that define aviation. If it's part of the flying world, you'll find it here. This is AeroExploration.
Well, hey everyone, welcome back to the AeroExploration Podcast. My name is Jim. I'm your host, and on this episode, it's going to be a little bit of a nerd out moment because I'm going to chat with Alex, who is the YouTube channel creator at MSP Live. That is a page that does occasional, probably weekly, a couple times a week, live streams from the MSP International Airport, and he has some really great stuff. So I can't wait to give you that in just a few minutes when we talk to Alex. All right, so in the aviation space, what have I been up to? Mostly just content creation right now, and that is not because I don't want to fly. As happens in the aviation world, what I've got going on is our Sundowner is still down, still working through those engine gremlins. We think it's going to be something with the carburetor, maybe a couple other things to look at, but that carburetor is going to get looked at again way more extensively and see if that's what's causing us our issues with the mag checks and not getting full power on the run-ups. So my guess is hopefully that will fix it. Not a mechanic, so we'll see. I've tried to fly with the club a couple times, but the times I've reserved, or maintenance. I was supposed to go flying tomorrow. The aircraft is down for maintenance again, the Piper Warrior that I was going to fly. So I've got a couple more opportunities this week where I'm going to try to fly. I got to get checked out again on the 172 and the Sundowner at the club. So just need to put in the reps there, fly with a CFI and get checked out. And once I do that, then I can then in turn start doing checkouts in those aircraft. And it will open up my possibilities of aircraft available to me as opposed to just Broken Warrior right now. Probably will be fixed sometime tomorrow, but not during the window where I will be able to fly. So such is life and such is flying. Anyone who's been doing this long enough knows that I think for every 3 flights you schedule, you might get to take one of them. All right, so enough about me. Let's get into our guest for this episode. I'm happy to welcome Alex from MSP Airport Live. We had a really great conversation. We're going to talk all about his channel, where it's going, and just what he does out there. So without further ado, Alex. All right, well, Alex, thanks so much for joining me on this episode of the podcast. I'm super excited to have you here and honestly, big fan of your work. So I'll have some nerd out moments, I'm sure. But you are the man behind MSP Airport Live, and I am absolutely here for it. I love it, and I hope that other people can get a chance to check it out too. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Super cool to know that you're a fan of my work and the other people that helped me out. And yeah, we have a lot of fun doing it. So it's good to see that folks like you are enjoying it, and we'll hopefully be back at it soon here this week. So,
all right. Yeah, I've gotten my boss hooked on it now. He's turned the corner into aviation nerdery like me. So, yeah, it's great. And you've got a great voice for it, man. So,
appreciate it.
Love what you do.
Yeah, you bet.
All right. So I'm going to jump into the really hard questions now. So how long have you been interested in aviation and plane spotting?
I've been into aviation for quite a while. In fact, when I was a toddler, I started to get really into it. And I actually grew up in Bloomington. I mean, I don't live there now, but I grew up in Bloomington. The flight path for runway 22 was on the departure right over my house. So when Northwest would fly the 747s, growing up, when Northwest Airlines was still around, just having those big old jets buzz the house at 3 or 4 in the afternoon was super cool. And, during the summertime when I was growing up too, I'd always go to the community pool in East Bloomington, and it was very near the airport. And, there was usually a safety break in around the time that the flights to Tokyo would leave, and you just hear this rumble, and right over the tree line, over these houses, screaming into the air is this big 747-400. So, that memories like that, and also driving by the airport, seeing all the red tails and, being close to MSP. And, actually, my parents, I'm too little to remember this, but they actually took me out to the aircraft observation area many times to go watch the planes, before 9/11, before that got taken away. But, really early on, I just was infatuated with it. And I kind of left it for a while, and I didn't come back to the aviation hobby, until I was out of high school pretty much. Back in 2018, I got back into it, and, a buddy of mine is like, hey, you want to come down to the viewing area and go plane spotting? I'm like, what the heck? Sure. I'll find out what that's about.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. So I found out about our public viewing area and the dog park and some of the other great spots you can go watch airplanes. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And, then I was also involved in a lot of media stuff too, because it's my other passion. And, I started experimenting in the early 2020s with doing some video stuff. And, I did a lot of live production work. Since high school, I have been putting in some good time with BEC TV in Bloomington, which is where I got my start as a volunteer tech. And that, led to an interest in wanting to pursue media as a career. Got my degree from Hennepin Tech in video production, interactive design. Of course, I've accumulated a lot of contractor and, part-time production experience outside of that as well. Okay. And even on-air stuff too. You can probably tell. But
you're pretty good. It's just
been a lot of fun, and out at the viewing area, made some friends, and eventually we just decided, hey, it'd be kind of cool because we knew that the live channels out in LA had been doing a lot of live plane spotting that we really enjoyed watching. We're like, well, what if we had that here? So that kind of spurred on a conversation, and it was less serious. But I'm like, guys, I know how to do all this stuff. I know how to program, broadcasty, type stuff, for a live show, basically. I know how to do cameras, audio, graphics. I know how to design packages, integrate information, all that jazz. I mean, I'm not perfect. I don't know everything, but I do have most of my bases covered. I'm like, hey, if you guys want to help me do this, we can go do that. And so that's kind of how that got started.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to say that, like, the video production value of it it's really entertaining to watch. I mean, you've got all these graphics, you've got replays. It's not like just someone points a camera at a runway and says, oh, there goes a 737. There's some thought that goes into it and some real production value. So I think that's probably what draws a lot of people to it, not just the plane spotting. So.
Yeah, and that's kind of the intended audience too. It's not just for the folks that are generally interested in aviation, but aviation, there's a lot of people you're going to run into that are going to know like the very minute differences, between, a 737 next gen series and a classic 737 series, for example, or even like the Max series, right? An example would be the exhaust vent on the APU in the tail cone of the next gen series versus the Max, for example, like very minor details like that. And so that kind of forced me down the rabbit hole a little bit, just to study the aircraft more. But of course, I'm also a big, study nerd myself. So I'm like, okay, I'm curious with this. And now I'm going to go look into this. I'm going to go look into this. And I like the historical angle too on, some of the older aircraft that are in circuit, like Delta 757s, for example, right? Being ex-Northwest and, ties back to Northwest Airlines that, I just grew up with fond memories of, and seeing those red tails and, everyone remembers that around here quite fondly too. So, I feel like not just the nerdy angle, but also kind of the, here's a fun fact for you, here's kind of like a historical angle of, hey, this aircraft used to fly for this airline and, this is, when it was delivered, things like that. So, I mean, I kind of find those little factoids interesting, and I've kind of really focused on, incorporating those into the shows when I can.
So that brings up an interesting question for me. You mentioned these factoids and kind of the things that you bring out throughout your broadcast. First of all, it's got a real like play-by-play feel, almost like you are watching a sporting event with these aircraft. But you're able to pull these little facts out about, like you just mentioned, like this used to be a Northwest aircraft. What kind of work goes in on the front end before you even start packing stuff up and heading to the airport to get that information? Or is it like on the fly?
Well, it's really just stored up in here. I've had, hours of research, and, I'm talking to friends about that stuff all the time. I'm close friends with a flight attendant that lives in Blaine, and he's been in the aviation industry for well over 20 years, and his brain is amazing, the amount of experiences that he has, as a working flight attendant for Delta Airlines, and, because he's also a big av geek like I am. So, I kind of pick his brain a little bit.
Sure.
The different things that he's into. And I'm also into the classics as well. So to kind of understand like where our current commercial aviation scene, has evolved from like, the classic planes back in the day, like the 727s and, the DC-10s, all the
Right.
great classics that we're, always reminiscing about, at some point, sooner or later. So, I mean, when we have the, chat about aircraft, or even just the 747s and things of that nature. So, I mean, it's just, through a lot of my time just researching stuff for fun. And, there's some things that, maybe after a broadcast, like, what, I'm going to go look that up. And of course, I got to give a lot of credit to my live viewers as well, because, they also impart a lot of knowledge just kind of into each and every show, which is great, because I usually end up learning something at the end of the day, which, hey, that's always a good thing, right?
That's a bonus.
You have an educated audience and everything too. It helps you out.
Sure does. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's another thing I noticed about your broadcasts is you're really engaged with the audience. You're reading the comments, you're responding to the comments. And I think that just gives another personal feel for the audience.
Yeah, and it's something I kind of struggled with early on, just because, when you're starting out with this kind of an undertaking, there's a lot of unknown factors. And, even though that you might know how to do all of your basics as far as like knowing how video production theory works and, maybe networking at a basic level, those gremlins on the tech end or on the network end, or something is going to pop up at some point.
Yeah.
And I've had some of the weirdest stuff pop up, but hey, you know what? I was able to fix it in a moment, or maybe like, okay, we'll come back tomorrow. I'll do some research or dig into that and fix it. And, we'll come back stronger. And, like we have pretty much an impeccable broadcast. I mean, we've pretty much, figured that out, and, myself included, but, just trying to stay on top of, making sure when people come in, making sure that they're welcome, like, hey, great to see you today. How are things? And, it's just one of the things that I always enjoy, just because we got a lot of viewers that, tune in from all over. And I actually was able to meet a live viewer that lives in Texas. I don't know why he was up here in the Twin Cities area. I mean, maybe he was visiting a friend or family or something like that. But, you just, run into a lot of cool people, and, you just get to meet some people like that, through chat and, eventually in real life. So, it's important to take care of your people regardless. But that's one of the things that I try and emphasize on, is taking care of my folks, making sure that, that they're all good to go. If they got any questions, I'll try and answer them the best I can. And because, MSP is a fascinating airport. It's not like
Absolutely.
the LAX, right?
Right.
Or a JFK, type spotter environment. Hub. But, we trade that, variety for being closer to everything. And, we're not going to get A380s. I mean, we don't need them.
No.
I mean, when you get a front row seat to an A330-300 blasting off for Amsterdam, Paris, London, and now we're going to get Rome and Copenhagen coming up pretty soon, as Delta's going to resume those seasonal services with the 330neo. I mean, hey, it never gets old. It's always a treat. So,
yeah, absolutely. Those are fun planes to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that you mentioned the play-by-play aspect of it, because I've done, play-by-play for sports, but, I'm also a huge sports junkie.
Okay, so we talked a bit about, like, the production itself, as far as, how you kind of came about that in your style. And now I know that you've got some play-by-play experience, which clearly shows in how you present. But so let's talk a bit more about, like, the production portion from a standpoint of what's happening when you're live. Like, what kind of things are happening in the background that the viewer isn't necessarily aware of, but is still work that needs to get done?
Yep. And there's a lot of things that I'm looking at one time. So I'm looking at my network, how's my transmission doing? I'm looking at, I have a little camera monitor that's mounted to this little clamp that's not the built-in like monitor on the camera, but it actually is connected to my computer that shows me what's called the confidence feed. It's what's called a confidence monitor. That basically means that, this is what the program is outputting, and this is what's going to air. And, it just shows you, okay, I'm sending the right thing to air that I need to, nothing's acting a fool, right?
Yeah.
And then, I have my phone up. I've got flight radar so I can keep track of it, pay attention to what's taxiing, what's taking off, what's landing, because when you're near the geographical center of an airport like MSP, especially as busy as MSP is, it can get really hectic. I mean, you really have to have your head on a swivel, because, and hey, every live streamer that you're going to watch on YouTube is going to miss something, sooner or later. But, I mean, we can't, catch them all, but I certainly try to. But yeah, it's one of the things I'm paying attention to. Like, okay, I got to keep track of what's coming in, what's going out, what's coming my way taxiing, or for waiting for like maybe say for example like a charter flight or something that's not necessarily the usual suspect, right? Like the Gridiron Air 777 that came in last month that actually dropped off stranded travelers from Puerto Vallarta just before midnight. It laid over at MSP and departed the next day when actually we were on the air too. And that low flap departure was amazing. But just listening on frequency, and just looking at flight radar to, pay attention to make sure that we're on top of everything. And, and that's another thing too that I just mentioned is the scanner.
Yeah.
And I have it tuned to both tower and ground frequency so I could pay close attention to what's going on, who's getting clears to push back, who's taxiing where, so I can anticipate where things are going to be a lot better. I mean, that's the key to doing live video, right? Is the better you can anticipate something, the better that you're going to put yourself in a position to actually catch what the viewer wants to see or give them access to. So that's kind of what I'm looking at there. I'm listening by ear, paying attention to, what's being said on frequency, looking at my phone, for flight radar and also the chat as well to make sure that folks are taken care of. And then I'm also looking at my broadcast feed to make sure that I'm sending the picture and the graphics and everything I want to be displaying. And then it's also looking at, periodically, how's my network transmission doing? Or are we having any signal drops here and there? I mean, Starlink's been amazing where I haven't had to worry about that.
Okay.
But, sometimes the router will act up, or sometimes, there's like a power thing that I have to just jump in and fix real quick. Or maybe, one of my co-hosts decides that, they're going to show up a little bit later just because they had something else going on, or, now I got to step off the ladder and, we got to get them mic'd up. And, so there's a lot of different things that, I'm trying to keep an eye on and keep track of, throughout the, the course of a broadcast. I mean, it can be mentally exhausting after, maybe 6-7 hours. I mean, if you decide to marathon it for that long, but, it definitely takes some getting used to. I think, early on, it was a little bit of a challenge for me, but I think, once I started doing it a lot more, it's just building that repetition, right? You get used to doing stuff a lot more. You're an autopilot. You've already pushed the button on the mental flight director panel up there. Now you're an autopilot, and now you've already set your course. You're just ready to go.
So as far as like the graphics and stuff, that raises another question for me.
Yeah.
So like the ticker that's going on the bottom, is that just automated, or is that something that you or someone else has to be updating throughout the broadcast, or how does that work?
Yep. So that's actually a good question, because the data for weather and wind is all automated. So that's my own code that I plugged in to output that information. Even the wind chill information, is an automated, code. It continuously updates itself. So there's no need to go and touch it. Basically, you just make sure that, you have that connection, to the information it's trying to fetch, from your data source. But yeah, so that information is automated. Now, when it comes to the runways, I like to leave it in manual. So I can, have a fine control over, like runway ops, because they really don't change, during the course of a broadcast too much, to the point where you'd want to leave it like that. But I mean, that, usually gets set the day of, depending on what operations pattern that they're in. And then I know that I recently added like a weather forecast graphic, that plugs into automated data. So that just automatically goes and does it. And I also have a macro pad as well that allows me to clip replays. Like as soon as the aircraft is getting off the taxiway, boom, that clip is saved, and I could also cue the replay from where I'm at. Like, all right, let's take another look at this. And that's the other fun thing that we do is the replay thing, because it's an important storytelling aid. In some instances, where, oh my goodness, like wow, that was kind of an interesting moment. Let's go ahead and play that back again. It's just like live sports, right? When something significant happens, you're like, hey, let's engage that instant replay. There's only a few channels that I'm aware of that do that, but it's a really helpful tool to kind of, recap something or maybe take another look at it again. And of course, we stash those in the highlights when I can get to them at the end of the show. Like, hey, thanks for tuning in late. Here's what you missed.
Yeah. And that's a great point, because I think that the replays that you put out there are an important part of your broadcasts and what makes it what it is, and the entertainment value, to be able to go back and slow something down or take another look. And as you provide a little bit more commentary with it, while we're waiting for the next thing, it's not like there's a whole lot of like lull between one aircraft to the next. And I think I'm gonna pat you on the back here a little bit, but I think you're really good at taking advantage of that time space and throwing in these replays and other content which are still able to keep the audience engaged.
Yeah, and for an airport like MSP, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about like we're no JFK, we're no LAX. We don't have that environment where it is just continuous, nonstop feeds of aircraft arriving and taking off. To the point where we can't squeeze anything in. And MSP can get like that sometimes. There's certain short spurts during an evening or late afternoon where I cannot get in anything. I can't step away. I can't take a break. Yeah. But you know what? Hey, that's the thrill of it. I always get a kick out of that. But it's the maybe a couple minutes to a minute of dead space that just kind of. And I think it's actually a blessing in our case, because it gives us something unique that we can, kind of, fall back to and like, hey, let's look at this in slow motion. People can kind of grade the landings as they wish. But yeah, most of the time we just see greasers, and it's just so cool just to see, how these commercial pilots are able to put, these heavy jets down on a runway, hurling, at about well over 100 miles an hour, right? On landing and just smoothly butter it up. That's always cool. So just to be able to get, that second look, and it just kind of, I think, enhances what we're trying to show for our viewers. So I think it certainly adds to the storytelling, but also I think even the entertainment factor too.
Yeah. Well, in the YouTube game, it's all about retention, right? If I'm not looking at something interesting or hearing something interesting, I'm going to go watch the next thing, like JFK.
Yeah, and it's interesting to kind of see like what viewers are interested in, and how long they stick around. And anyone who runs a YouTube channel, can attest, about viewership analytics and how they're so deep into that, and and I was for a little bit of time, but I really just decided to, at a certain point, say, okay, we got to take care of the viewer first. That stuff is all going to fall in line eventually down the road. And, it's going to fluctuate. You're going to have ebbs and flows as it may, but, it's something that, hey, it's fun. Our viewers like it. We think it's an important storytelling aid. And I think it just fits for what my vision for the show is, what we're trying to do. Because, the whole like aesthetic that, I want to present plane spotting and MSP with is sort of, the ESPN angle, right?
Yeah, totally. I was reminded of my friend actually sent this to me today. He's also an aviation YouTuber, and have you heard of My Labor Life? He flies out of MSP.
Paul? Yeah.
Yep, Paul. Yep. So he was just on a podcast or something talking about like, all the analytics and all that stuff that's out there. He goes, if your video makes a difference for one person, it's worth it.
Yeah. And, it's just surprised me. There's been so many people that have been touched by this, that are fans of the show. And, that to me, is really, heartwarming for me, but it's also cool. Like, hey, there's other people that are interested in, not just what I'm creating, but what we're giving people access to. Because yes, I might be, the one that's kind of masterminding everything, and the one that's, at the dials, flipping the switches, and, taking care of folks on the air, walking people through the program. But, at the end of the day, I think in order to really impact people, you have to understand like what they want access to.
Yeah.
And just to really make it about that, especially with today, it's so easy to get, wrapped up in being a Mr. Entertainer. I'm trying to do it because I'm trying to give people better access to, high quality plane spotting presentation, right? Trying to give them, some fun stuff to look at. But yeah, in doing so, I've been able to, forge a lot of connections. The networking has been incredible. I've met a lot of great people as a result of this project.
Oh, I'll bet.
It's touched a lot of our viewers, a lot of our members. Shout out to our awesome members, by the way. You guys rock. If you're watching this. But and even just the people that have come to support me and actually producing this project, Captain Paul Hansen, for example, kind of cold called and reached out and be like, yeah, come on, let's see what this is about. I miss him. He's rarely available, but he has a lot of fun stories. He's got voiceover and radio work under his resumes, and he has the voice for it too.
Yeah.
And of course, we've had other personalities. John Joseph, just what a stud. Ex-Delta flight attendant, retired at the pandemic, was a flight attendant for 40 years, brings a lot of that, experience that he, accumulated in the airline industry with him, He's got a good voice for broadcasting. He's a lot of fun. He's an energetic, upbeat personality. And also I can't talk about co-host without mentioning RJ. And RJ Bean, she's been there, for a long time, on the channel. She's put in a lot of work and just has been really involved in the whole process. And I really like hearing what she has to say, and she's got a lot of fun stories that she'll share sometimes on the air too. She comes from a big airline family. Her dad was actually a captain for Northwest. Her mom is a flight attendant. I think her uncle was also a pilot for Northwest as well. So, I mean, red certainly runs deep in her veins and something that's very close to her. But yeah, it's like we all have our experiences in aviation and to be able to kind of, bring that to the forefront and also Logan Justice too. He's incredibly talented run and gun videographer, is super passionate about, flying. He actually has a CFI and, he also works for an aviation company too. Yeah. And, he's working in the aviation world now. And he's just super involved in the App Geek side of things. And it's been great, running into him and just, his brain and the knowledge that he has accumulated, and also running into people like Eric Paul as well. I mean, he's been a plane spotter. He's a veteran plane spotter around MSP. He's been around for a long time. And, the stuff that he's captured, through his lens, throughout like the past decade plus is pretty interesting, actually. He's got a really interesting archive of, like diversions and, special stuff. And you go back and you look at his video archive and like, wait, what? That used to fly here? What kind of world are we living in? Stuff like that, meeting really great people that have a lot to the, bring a lot to the table, that have a lot to share, that's meant, and then that's touched them too. That's meant a lot to me. And the fact that we can pass that on, to our audience, to touch them and, kind of keeping everybody entertained and, because, that's why we do plane spotting, right? It's a recreational hobby. We're in it for the entertainment. And, at the end of the day, we do this because we want to find unity with our community and we want to leave all the, problems of, current events and everything behind. And, but to do something that's productive, right? Because we have a shared interest and, and it's about these fascinating technological marvels that, and, even to have like a public viewing area here at MSP, this is pretty special. Right. So, I mean, we realize what we have, we're going to take advantage of it. And there's a lot of great people here. And of course, because of Northwest being here since the dawn of time, right. And how long they were headquartered here. Obviously the fabric of the aviation industry in the Twin Cities is very tightly knit. And there's a lot of people that are into aviation, because of the legacy and the mark that Northwest left behind that now Delta carries on here in the Twin Cities is remarkable. So, if we can, encourage the next person that hops on our show, make sure that, hey, they're informed, they're having a good time, hey, welcome to Plane Spotting if you're new. And if you're seasoned, hey, great you found us. Hopefully we can keep you entertained for the next, maybe several hours, depending on how long you have time to watch and spend time with us.
Absolutely. I know that I typically have it just running in the background while I'm working.
Yeah.
So. But he's talking about this. And that's another thing I like about your presentation. I'm like, I better look real quick. And, we got to replay because I missed it because I was doing something. So,
that's another reason why I have the replay. Because I know, and I speak from experience, that people love to lurk and work. They love to lurk and work.
Yep.
And I was doing that yesterday, actually, at work. I was watching some of my friends out in LA, Peter and Josh from LA Flights Live. They put a lot into taking care of their audience and, having a really personable plane spotting experience. So that's always fun to kind of, hop on. And, they were actually here last year. In fact, it was, totally by chance when I got to meet Peter from LA Flights when he did his whole Twin Cities visit. That weekend was crazy. I mean, we had the cold temps. He's still in shock from that. Being a resident of the state of California, you're used to the nice sunny weather and the very hospitable temperature that is lingering throughout the year, right? Just the nice weather, and then you go to Minnesota and you're like, holy cow! And then of course,
bundle up.
And then the second day, into the second day of his spotting trip, there's a huge snowstorm that blew through. So it dumped a bunch of snow on the roads. And, I'm sure for him, he's like, I don't know if I want to come back here, but I mean, he loved the viewing area and he loved the spotting community, which is great. and just be able to meet him when he came out there. Because I actually was capturing a retirement flight departure for somebody who I served with at my local church that, we had connected, and, we kind of, like, hey, wait, you're a pilot for Delta? Awesome. I'm an aviation enthusiast. And so that kind of got the ball rolling. And,
Sure.
he knew I did some video stuff and, went out and, caught his flight. And Peter just happened to be setting up that day. It was just on that day where both kind of happened. Got to meet Peter and LA flights. And that was really cool. And again, just kind of going back to that networking thing.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of fun.
So speaking of that networking thing, do you find that within the live streaming plane spotting community, are you guys all kind of like connected? Do you interact with the other ones, kind of get tips and tricks, or how does that work within that community?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have your individual groups like community, but like most people are open to sharing things and connecting and just hanging out and having a good time. It's really laid back, which is nice.
I kind of find the same thing within like the aviation podcasting and in video space, that everyone is like super collaborative and willing to help you out. And I think that that's really awesome about, I don't know if it's just special to aviation or not, but it's great, the community that comes together around aviation, whether it's enthusiasts that are spotting or people that are, learning how to fly. It's awesome. It's all awesome.
Yeah. And I think it just goes back to the main, element of everyone understanding why we actually do it, right? And what we do, and kind of understanding it actually takes a little bit of effort to do this and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of mutual respect that's shared for that. But also just hey, we're in this to have a good time, exchange information, hang out, have fun, watch some planes, nothing too serious, right? But it's really interesting to see, how many people are open, to collaborating and working in the space, myself included. I think that in the end, it's important to keep it that way, to be, inviting, but to make sure that it's inclusive, right? So that, everyone,
100%.
Has a space here, and also that, the viewer at the end of the day, the people that are consuming the content that want access to the aviation stuff, right? To go look at that special plane that came in earlier that they couldn't get out to see because they were stuck at work, or maybe they had a school commitment or family function, for example, right? They can go and see it. There's a lot of collabs are fun just in general, but it's just kind of helping the community see more of what they want to see. I think that everyone understands that, and takes some work, and certainly it's great to see just the community wide participation. It just wants to make you do more of it. So and that's something that I like being in this space about is just working with a lot of people, the networking opportunities. You just never know what's going to happen. And, and just with the community, just being laid back and, super supportive, just, makes you want to do it even more. So, it's always great.
So when you do a live, do you have a set, I want to do this day of the week, or how do you come up with a plan for when you're going live?
That's actually a really good question. And, I've spoken about it, in many of my live shows, because, viewers have asked the same question. And, it's an important question. You got to keep asking, hey, when's the next live show going to come on?
Yeah.
The live shows are really planned around my availability. So I look at my schedule, throughout the week, hey, I got these commitments going on. I got work on these days. How does that fit into this jigsaw puzzle? And then once I get that figured out, I go look at the weather. What's it going to be like that day? Yeah. And during the winter time, I stress it a lot more because, if it's below maybe 12 degrees or 13 degrees, I can stand out in 15-degree weather and take mild breezes all bundled up, right? And not completely turn into a popsicle because I built up that tolerance. But the equipment at a certain point will really start to get fussy. And then when everything's nice and cold, when you want to wrap your cables, to put them away nice and neatly at the end of a show, all of your stuff is, hooked up. You got to disconnect it and you got to coil it. Now all the cables are stiff and those wires get, really stiff in there, and you start stressing the metal too much, right? Metal fatigue.
Yeah, you don't want that.
Yeah.
No.
And, some cables, like this cable, for example, that goes into my headset, this is actually a replacement cable. This is the second cable that I've had to purchase for this headset. The first one that was out in the cold with me for pretty much the entire winter. And then, I use this headset with, myself and, maybe, a co-host, after things started to thaw up. And I'm like, wait a minute, like, why is this headset not working? It's cutting in and out. I'm like, oh no, it could be a mic problem. Nope. I tested it with a working cable and, this headset was fine. Thankfully, because these things are not, they're not cheap. They're quite expensive, but quite necessary. To get the audio quality, whereas it's on par with where people expect it to be, and also just legible and sounds good, right? Because nobody wants to listen to crappy audio. But it was a cable, and I'm like, oh, and so yeah, you just want to make sure that your equipment in those kind of conditions, with going back to the whole weather thing, that you're not putting it in such an extreme environment where it's not going to perform reliably where you need it to, right? Because the whole goal of, especially if you're going to be out there for a long time, you want to set stuff up and you want to have it just sit and cook.
Yep.
Right. I mean, as long as you've done your due diligence and prepping all of it, right? Just you can let it be, but you really want to make sure that you're not just taking care of yourself, but you're taking care of your equipment too. So I mean, if it gets to be below a certain temperature, it can get uncomfortable for me even sometimes. So I'm like, okay, this is what I feel like doing. You're just going to play it safe, or hey, maybe the equipment's just not really wanting to play ball. But then of course, the other thing too, you go to the really hot, hot end of the spectrum, right? When we get into our, summer months where it gets really hot up here.
Sure does.
Right. And I know in July, I mean, there were a few streams, back last year where, we were in excess of 90 degrees. Yeah. And our equipment was really, really just, not taking the heat well. It's just where the computer, actually crashed a couple times because the direct heat from the midday sun is so oppressive that it was actually warming everything up to be, hotter than the actual air temperature outside, to the point where, that laptop was over 100 degrees. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's not going to work.
No more of that.
Yeah. I mean, well, of course, with the spring coming up too, I mean, we're going to have some really nice mild temps. So I'm really excited and looking forward to our next month, maybe few months of live shows here. But, just looking at and seeing what the weather is going to be like, getting back to the stream planning thing, what's the weather look like for that day that I'm available? If I have multiple days available, okay, what does the weather conditions look like? What do the winds look like, right? What kind of runway ops are we going to expect? And usually the wind forecasts are pretty dead on. So I'll look at the wind forecasts and, say, okay, well, this day, we're going to have pretty gusty winds. This day is going to be nice and mild. Maybe it'll give us a better runway configuration that we want to stream. So we'll, me and, the people that I stream with, we'll take that into consideration. And then that kind of goes into the final call.
Are there other people that help make this come together, or is this just a one-man band when you're out there?
Well, some days it's a one-man band. I mean, typically it's, as far as actually like producing the physical bit, right? Somebody's there, setting the equipment up, running the equipment, broadcasting it. Most of the time, especially during the colder months, it's just me out there. So I got to find a system that works.
You can't get anyone to come join you?
I try. I say, hey, you want to come out? And like, no, it's too cold, or no.
Call me in April.
Basically. But, there's a lot of help that also happens, not just with the on location, production help, right? Which, I will get, somewhat consistent help too, like when RJ or John, comes out to help me co-host, maybe once in a blue moon, Paul, or, maybe Logan comes to help, right? Or even Eric showed up, out of the blue on a Saturday, and I'm like, hey, what are you doing here? It's like, yeah, here, go throw on a headset and we'll entertain our viewers for a little bit, right? But there's also a lot of other folks that, aren't on location physically that do help a lot. I cannot thank my moderators enough for the work that they do and put in, and especially I got to give a lot of props to, especially not just with the modding in our live chat, to make sure that, stuff doesn't go off the rails and, just becomes an absolute zoo. But also helps me, with more of the, the back shop stuff, the managing part of the channel, right? Like with emails and communication and, strategizing, those things. I got to give a lot of props to Michael Larson. He's my number 2. Terrific guy. He actually works for Cirrus Corporate
Okay.
in Duluth, and he's really good at what he does. He also is a private pilot as well. Loves aviation. He has a bit of a broadcasting background too. I know that he's covered some high school sports up there and whatnot, but he's a very intelligent person, especially when it comes to the business minded stuff. Just super smart. Knows his stuff too. I mean, he went to school at Academy College for aviation business management,
Okay.
and so he's been an absolute force. Just in helping me, get everything organized, because I can be a little bit on the messier side, just more as the
totally
working creative.
Totally
But he does a lot of, important, stuff, more on the back end that helps me out too, that I just can't thank him enough for. I wish he was down here a lot more, but when you're roughly about 2 to 3 hours away, it's kind of hard to be down here. But no, I mean, I just genuinely appreciate, all that he's done, even though that it's been more remote. It's so critical.
Sure.
But yeah, I just want to extend a big thank you to him. I mean, Mike, if you're watching this, thank you, buddy. You don't know how much your help means. Like, I mean, it means a lot. So
there's a lot of work
just
that goes
having
into these
people.
things.
Yeah. And, just being able to, sit back or even just like message me saying like, hey, we're not getting audio here. He'll also alert me to maybe some issues we might be running into on the technical side of, right. Or, maybe is going to pass along a message from some of our other social pages or community posts I'm not looking at. So, he's sort of like my master controller, if you will. Looking after things. So he's kind of like the master controller, that's sitting back, and looking at the feed, looking at messages, assessing the stream health, the technical stuff, which is really important. And I know that we have our other chat moderators. Big thanks to Trevor Christofferson, Daniel Swanson. They've been great, big fans of the channel. But it's like, hey, you want a mod? And they're really good at what they do. If there's somebody who's acted a fool and they're so fast to get to them. I mean, it's nuts. So yeah,
That's good to have though.
Yeah. And, I actually met them, at the viewing area spotting, conversations happened and, stuff fell into place as it currently is too. So, it's been great working with them and also just getting to know them as people. Right.
Sure.
Most of my mods I've met in person. I have a good relationship with, and, with another fellow av geek, it's great to have, support on the chat end, on the, the master control end, like what Micah does, and even stuff with more of the managing aspects of the channel, which of course is why he gets the title of managing producer, because that's what managing producers do, right?
Yeah.
They take care of all of the, the less desirable creative stuff of managing a channel. Yeah. But yeah, it's a really, really good operation, I think, that we have going on right now.
And I'm not sure how many people realize how much is actually going on in the background on any of these channels that are out there. It's more than just sitting down in front of a camera or putting a camera and pointing at an airplane. There's so much back end stuff that goes on. So it's great that you've got people to help with that.
Yeah, and in the larger streams, they have a separate feed for just behind the scenes stuff.
Good grief.
And that's for the bigger channels. For me, I probably will do a behind the scenes, but it's kind of hard to do that at MSP because I'm stuck on a ladder, right? You're not going to really see me in the frame, twisting the dials and flipping the switches and, doing the DJ kind of things. It's going to be like, where is bro at? Like, I don't see him. He's not here. Is Alex okay?
He's everywhere.
No, I'm up on my ladder. I'm high on my perch. I'm getting all the action going on. So that's why I don't have any behind the scenes stuff. Yeah. So when I watch some of these other live streamers, going back to some of the behind the scenes feeds, and just being able to do it myself, and now I have a pretty extensive knowledge of how production theory works at different levels for video production. I'm involved in the industry professionally. I've worked out of production trucks. I've done broadcast optics before, especially I currently do broadcast optics and stuff like that, at the professional sporting level, just learning how to do it and even down to, maybe more at, the local level where I've done contract work for, community TV before. You get a sense of what's involved, right?
Yeah.
And then also just with me always searching for a better way to do things and an easier way to do things. But, it's like, just trying to find a balance, I guess, I think is important, especially if you're trying to set up in a hurry, right? Like you have limited time, maybe you were planning to start at this time, but, I got out late because, there's another commitment that I'm coming from, or, crap, I had to drop what I'm doing and I have to travel down to the airport quick. There's like a diversion coming in, right? Like the A380 that happened last year, that happened so flippin' fast. I mean, they were in and out of here in less than an hour. I mean, for an aircraft like that, getting out of here was, at the time, everyone was thinking like, what? Like it was in and out of here that fast.
Yeah.
I mean, kudos to the folks at MSP and the folks at Lufthansa for being able to turn that huge aircraft around so fast, after that emergency medical divert. But, it's just sometimes you just have to find a setup that is just quick, reliable, that has enough in it, right? You're not overdoing it, that you're able to work within reason. So, that's the other thing watching these live, spotting channels is like, okay, here's what I want to do. And, here's what I don't, that sort of thing. It's really fascinating to see what these different channels do and how the final product is made. When I was growing up, when I was in high school, I got really hooked on that TV show called How It's Made from the Science Channel. I just binge watched the heck out of that. And it was just one of the most fascinating things on TV that I was kind of into at the time. And I still kind of go back to it. And I think that when you watch, and when you watch stuff like that, you really develop a deep understanding. And I think even an appreciation for how, this thing, like even like our computers that we're using to, send our audio and video through so we can talk to each other and do this podcast. And, the How It's Made on computers came out like eons ago, right? That stuff's probably ancient, but, you understand, a little bit of how many different steps, how much equipment, how much effort is required to produce things that we take for granted every single day. And I think it kind of gives, people that might want to get into it a little inspiration as to, okay, they use this kind of headset maybe, or, I wonder what kind of, camera they're using. Oh, wow, that's actually really cool that they use that. I might have to try that. So, and, when I was kind of building up the different equipment, into, my current setup, and it's still a work in progress. I mean, mine's certainly getting up there, with the scope of how much is involved to produce it, but I'm trying not to let it get too big, just to make it, easy to set up. I'm trying to make it so that it's only an hour tops to set up, because I don't want to be out there for 2-3 hours, setting up all this unnecessary gear and then, having it take an eternity to tear it down.
Yeah.
Because that's no fun.
No.
Because at the end of a long stream, I just want to sometimes get home and, eat something, or maybe I just want to get home and crawl into bed.
Yeah.
I'm so doggone tired. So with these behind the scenes streams and the fact that creators are doing it and letting their audience kind of on the inside a little bit, really adds a personal touch. It adds another level of connection with the viewer, and it kind of makes them feel as if they're a part of what's going on. And that's really important.
Yeah. I love that. I think that, you're right. There's just so much that goes on in the background to get that behind the scenes aspect. And even the big channels, like, come into a day in my life and let's get comfortable and see how I do this.
Yeah. Come on and ride shotgun. Let's produce this together.
So as you continue to grow your channel and grow the live streams, how has that evolved over time, and where do you plan to take it in the future?
That's a really good question.
I asked the good questions.
Yeah, I mean, our channel has grown in spurts. I know over the summertime when we had our international friends, KLM, Discover, Air France, right? The seasonal treats that we get in the summertime, and also the springtime too. You can't forget the spring. Those piqued a lot of, folks' attention to, tune in and watch MSP Airport. And, it's, hey, it's fun seeing Air France. It gives us a nice break from all the Delta, Sun Country, Delta that we see quite frequently. But, I mean, apart from the seasonal stuff, that it really piques a lot of people's interest. I think it's just the randomness of what goes on that draws in a lot of people. And, especially during the wintertime, I mean, we had a huge period of growth that was pretty well sustained between January and February. And there's a lot of people that, were tuning in from the Chicago area,
Sure.
Maybe internationally. I know that because in the wintertime, we want to keep close to maybe about a 5 or 6 hour runtime if we can help it. We picked up a lot of people, across the pond in the UK or in Europe that were watching for the first time, just with that earlier start, right? Because
Sure.
at that time, they're probably, just winding down for the day and they're looking for something to watch. So we found a really interesting spot too. I mean, we've seen a lot of growth. We flew, and I just mean we flew past 10,000 subscribers, right at the end of the year, and been picking up a lot of people that are into plane spotting. Maybe they clicked on the thumbnail, and it's cool to see how many more people are continuing to engage, and who are finding us for the first time, right? And just to provide a different than what people are typically used to looking for, or would reach at right away, right? Because LAX is great as an airport as it is, and it's an amazing airport, don't get me wrong. Like, that's something that I need to do at some point, is do a show out there. But everyone's seen it.
Yeah.
Right. And I've kind of seen this too in the live aviation space, where early on, and there wasn't a whole lot of channels like maybe several years ago. But as more people started doing it, more airports started showing up with their own direct to AvGeek feeds, and from video producers that were doing it live out there, and more markets being included in the bigger picture. I mean, with the streaming here at MSP, with me doing it, just kind of adding to the the huge collection of different live channels and broadcasters that are providing live aviation for aviation enthusiasts. And that sort of broadened the scope tremendously as to what people are into. And and as a result, more people are curious. And I also know that you asked the question about where the channel might be going, in addition to how does the growth look like. And one of the things that now that I have a lot of essential gear to produce this stuff, I can focus even more on, and we have memberships, people that willingly donate or contribute every month. We get people that super chat. We get people that we have a couple businesses that actually sponsor us too.
Nice.
Big shout out to DG Pilot in St. Paul, and also Jet Set Shirts. Eric makes some fantastic stuff. He's got great merch. Donnie from DG Pilot, that whole crew, just big shout out to them. Donnie's been with this whole project since the days before MSP Airport Live was even brought online. He saw what this could be, and he was a big fan of live shows that were running out in LA at the time, and he saw what this could be. And, but yeah, to have sponsors like that run a great business, that have a great service for AvGeeks, and for people that are looking for travel gear, maybe guys to go out and do something fun, right? Or that are looking for maybe just something that's local, right? They can give to somebody else. Have like a place like that could sort of cater to different niches, and that also kind of wants to also promote the aviation community as well.
Yeah,
you get support from them. It's allowed us to go pretty far and get off the ground. To be able to have that kind of a backing to support the overhead, what it costs to do it, is critical. But also, to have, the additional support, maybe the super chats that comes in, right? That, is all going to fund, trips later on down the road, which was kind of the original vision that Eric, Logan, and I, so we kind of all founded the channel, right? I mean, I'm the lead, so I'm the primary owner. But when we were talking about how this was going to happen, right? So we were going to get on our feet, we're going to get our gear, right? We're going to get everything to the point where we're producing the stuff that we want to consistently. And then from there, once we have that foundation, when we have the accoutrements, right, we have, the things that can really make it sing loud, clear, and just amazing. Then we're going to go after and, maybe go explore some airports and, just kind of just explore airports because we want to, and knowing that some of our viewers might want to as well. So we're certainly looking into, maybe some of the long-term stretch goals. So, I mean, that's kind of where, that's where I want the channel to go. But we'll see what happens. We're going to stick to being consistent, right? Welcoming. We're going to have some fun, right? We're going to share some planes. And yeah, it's hopefully going to, continue to turn out well for us. And in that regard.
Well, Alex, this has been awesome. I've had such a great time talking to you about all kinds of different things. Thank you so much for what you do with your channel and for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on and just to be able to share a little bit about what I do and all that. And it's really great to, again, seeing people like you, other content creators in the space, checking it out, and just really appreciate that. And, maybe we can look forward to collaborating or something like that. I know that you mentioned that too. So
Sure.
yeah, we'll see what happens down the road, but yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun with the warmer weather coming up, and looking forward to doing some streams where I don't turn into a popsicle and I don't have to bundle up.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. All right. Well, thank you so much to Alex for joining me on this episode of the AeroExploration Podcast. I'm really glad that this worked out. We had a really great conversation, and I'm excited to see where his channel goes. He's got over 10,000 subscribers. He's looking at doing some maybe traveling in the future. So it'll be really exciting to see where his channel grows and where he can take it from there. Hey, speaking of growing channels, if you are liking what I'm doing here on AeroExploration, be sure to share this with all your aviation enthusiast friends. Like and subscribe to the channels, leave comments, leave ratings and reviews. I will read them in future episodes, and it helps to keep me going as well. So if you are interested in being a future guest, you got a cool story to say about aviation, a cool career path that you've taken within aviation, I would love to hear from you. So email me at jim@flyingmidwest.com. I would love to hear your story and have the opportunity to share that with our audience. Finally, if you haven't yet checked out Alex's YouTube channel, I'm going to put a link down in the show notes so that you're able to check that out. But it's MSP Airport Live. He goes live a couple times a week. And if you're not able to catch it when he's live, there's all kinds of like bonus things that he puts on the page, or you can go back and watch an old stream. So always an option as well. All right, so I think that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. This is AeroExploration, and we'll see you next time.